Have you ever felt like an illness just popped up completely out of nowhere? One day you're feeling great, and the next, bam, you're sick. Well, in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on a fascinating roadmap from the ancient science of Ayurveda. It reveals the secret six-stage journey an illness takes, often long before we even feel that first symptom.
See, we tend to think of getting sick as an event, right? A thing that just happens. But what if that sudden cold or that surprise diagnosis wasn't so sudden after all? I mean, it really feels random, doesn't it? Like someone just flipped a switch inside you from healthy to sick. You go to bed feeling perfectly fine, and you wake up with a killer sore throat. You're left wondering, where on earth did that come from? Well, Ayurveda suggests it's not a switch at all. It's more like a slow burn. It teaches that a disease isn't some random event, but actually a journey with a very clear path. And that path is marked by all these subtle little clues that something's out of balance. Clues we get long before the major symptoms ever show up. So if disease is a journey, you're probably asking, is there a map? And the answer is, you bet there is. Ayurveda provides this brilliant framework for understanding the whole process, and it's called Shatkriya Kala. Let's break that word down, because it's actually pretty cool. Shat means six. Kriya means action or treatment, and Kala means time. So if you put it all together, you literally get the 6 times for action, 6 distinct stages where we have a chance to step in and do something about it. And here it is. This is our map. This diagram lays out the whole 6-stage journey, starting with Sanchaya, which is accumulation, and going all the way around to Beta, or complication. We're going to use this as our guide for the rest of our journey. Okay, let's dive into those first 3 stages. Now, these are absolutely crucial for prevention, mainly because they're so subtle. You can think of them as the body's early whispers, little hints that something is starting to go off track. It all starts with Sanchaya, or accumulation. This is the very beginning, where tiny imbalances from our diet or our lifestyles start to pile up. And the symptoms? They're incredibly mild. Maybe a little bit of heaviness after you eat, some slight stiffness, or just feeling a bit sluggish. It's the kind of stuff we all just brush off. Now, if we ignore that initial buildup, we drift into stage 2, prakopa or agitation. Here, that imbalance gets stirred up, it intensifies. The ancient texts say it becomes liquefied, as if it's getting ready to move. The symptoms get a little more noticeable here, maybe things like sour burps or a mild burning feeling. And this is where it gets really interesting. The ancient texts use this amazing analogy to explain what happens next. Imagine you're heating some solid ghee in a pan. As it melts and turns to liquid, that's stage 2, prakopa. But if you keep that heat on, it starts to foam up and bubble right over the edge of the pan. And that overflow is stage 3, prasara, the spread. This is a huge tipping point where the problem is no longer contained. The imbalance literally overflows its original home and starts to travel around the body, looking for a weak spot to settle in. The texts also compare it to yeast and flour rising up and overflowing their bowl. And this right here is exactly why we miss these early warnings. Think of an illness like an iceberg. Those first 3 stages we just talked about, accumulation, agitation, and spread, they're all happening below the waterline. They're subtle, functional changes that are mostly invisible to a lot of conventional tests, and that's why we often don't have a clue anything is wrong until it becomes a much, much bigger problem. So let's move on to the next 3 stages. This is where the illness finally breaks the surface of the water. Now, the body's whispers are turning into much louder, much more obvious shouts for our attention. Welcome to stage 4, Sthana Samstraya, or localization. Remember that spreading imbalance? Well, it's kind of like a burglar checking all the windows and doors in your body, looking for one that's unlocked. It finds a weak or susceptible spot, maybe a genetically weak organ, for instance, and it sets up shop. This is where you start to see the pre-symptoms of a specific disease, like prediabetes or that first hint of joint stiffness. And this next part is so important. Stage 5, Vyakti, or manifestation, is what we in the modern world usually call the beginning of an illness. The symptoms are finally clear, they're measurable, and you go to the doctor and get a diagnosis. But as we've just seen, it's actually step 5 on a much longer journey. That's a huge shift in perspective, right? And finally, if the disease is still not addressed, we reach stage 6, Beta, or complication. This is where the illness becomes chronic. It starts causing real damage to tissues and organs, and it can even lead to new, more serious complications. At this point, treatment becomes so much more difficult.
So this is a fascinating map for sure. But does this ancient framework really apply to the kinds of illnesses we see today? Let's take a look. Well, here's a perfect example of just how relevant it is. Check out how neatly Shot-Kriakala maps right onto the progression of type 2 diabetes. Stage 1, accumulation, lines up with the predisposing factors like genetics and lifestyle. Fast forward to stage 5, manifestation, and you've got the classic diagnosable symptoms like frequent urination. And in stage 6, we see those devastating complications like organ failure. It's the exact same journey, just described with different words. So what's the most powerful takeaway from this entire ancient map? Well, it's something we all kind of know intuitively, but we often forget. It's all about timing. The ancient texts give us one last beautiful metaphor to really lock this idea in. It's about the difference between pulling a tiny weed from the ground and trying to uproot a massive tree. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? The whole goal is to take action when the problem is still a small sapling, back in those early whisper stages, before it grows into a giant tree that's nearly impossible to move. So you see, this isn't just some dusty old trivia. It's an incredibly powerful tool for prevention. By learning to tune in and listen to our bodies, to recognize those early whispers, we give ourselves the power to make simple changes that can stop a disease dead in its tracks. It's really a shift from just managing sickness to actively cultivating health. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. What small saplings in your own health, what little whispers, could you tune in and address today?